Well, good morning, everybody. I'm glad you've been able to join us this morning. My name is Michael Hogue. I'm Vice President for Workforce Development here at WireNet. And thank you again for joining us for today's webinar, Embracing and Retaining the Next Generation Workforce. I'm happy to present this in partnership with Tooling U SME. We know that with 5 different generations, there's a wider breadth of talent in the workforce than ever. Companies have access to an incredible array of skills and knowledge, which is great news. As a business landscape continues to accelerate and labor markets continue to be tight, we'll need them all. But that doesn't mean organizations have to have a handle on managing this diversity, much less leveraging it for a competitive advantage. We're confident you'll find plenty of insights and fresh approaches towards recruiting, training, and developing this new generation of workers that can propel your organization towards greater loyalty and business results. Advance the slide. For those unfamiliar with WireNet, we're celebrating 30 years of dedication to strengthening Northeast Ohio through support of manufacturing firms. Basically, we help manufacturers thrive to ensure their economic impact continues to strengthen our region. This slide illustrates the span of programming that all revolves around WireNet's motto, where manufacturing matters. What matters to manufacturers today is talent development. Our recent manufacturing survey bears this out, with 88% of respondents claiming that attracting talent is difficult, and many of them believe it negatively impacts their profitability. So, learning about finding and developing new generations of talent is part of our effort to respond. Advance the slide. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and participants are muted. If you'd like to ask a question during the webinar, please use the chat window. If the chat window doesn't appear on the left side of your screen, there's a little talk button icon in the lower left-hand corner. Just click that and your chat box should come up and you should be able to enter questions as they come up. And we'll save plenty of time at the end to respond to as many questions as possible, and we promise to wrap up promptly at noon. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Denise Ball. Denise is a workforce development specialist with Tooling U SME and has over 25 years as a practitioner in learning and development with specific focus in the manufacturing industry. She's got a very full plate balancing workshops, corporate trainings, and webinar presentations just like this, as well as managing her own private enterprise, a husband, and 5 children. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Denise to share with us what successful employers are doing to attract and retain these new generation workers. Denise, take it away.
Thanks, Mike. Well, welcome, everyone. I'm excited to share with you and to just give you some great tips and pointers as we try to navigate these waters, and just really excited to do that. I know many of you are familiar with Tooling U SME. SME is Society of Manufacturing Engineers out of Dearborn, Michigan. We've been doing manufacturing, supporting the advancement of it through technology and promoting the workforces we train for over 80 years. So I always tell people we live, breathe, and sleep manufacturing, and we love it. A little background about myself personally. Prior to coming to Tooling U SME, I actually worked at Lakeland Community College in workforce development, helping manufacturers put together training programs. And prior to that, I also helped with our company business that my husband ran, which was just a small machine shop. And just, you know who the free labor was on Saturdays? It was me. So definitely been around manufacturing for many, many years. And I always laugh and say when it comes to talking about Zs and millennials, I feel like I literally live in the trenches because I have 5 children. 4 of them are millennials. One of them's a Z. So definitely talked about daily and lived an experience. So Really excited to talk with you today. As Tooling U SME, we work with over 600 schools. We work with companies, economic development agencies, and community-based organizations like WireNet. So just really love what we do and really want to be a help and a partner to all of the different organizations. So want to share some of our session goals today. We're going to be discussing millennials and Zs, the facts, as well as some of the common myths. And then identify opportunities that manufacturing has in developing and helping to fill the skills gap that we're all very familiar with. We live it every day. So I actually want to start with a video. Let's hope it loads, just to kind of start off all of our day with a smile.
Ding, 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 ding. It's inside your local coffee shop, sporting, humming, buying facial hair. Somehow he believes although he has no job, that by his 30s he will be a millionaire. M-I-L-L-E-N-N-I-A. On her Instagram with the quote and inspiration hopes to change the world by wearing yoga hands on with her dream knowledge of spiritually oil. M-I-L-L-E-N-N-I-A. Oh, God, I love a video. M-I-L-L-E-N-N-I-A. Oh, God, I love a video. 27 years old, trying to make it all their own. Maybe stop believing your parents' home. Maybe we're just wrong. Criticism isn't easy for their ears. They feel like they know most everything. See, they grew up with undeserved confidence, 'cause they got trophies just for projects that pay. M-I-L-L-E-N-N-I-A. Oh, God, I love a video. M-I-L-L-E-N-N-I-A. Oh, God, I love a video. In a couple of years, we will have to pass the torch. In a couple of years, they will be in charge, and one will be our president. Please pray for millennials.
Now, I didn't say it was politically correct, but it is a great video that really captures quite a bit, not only about millennials, but also your Zs. So what are your Zs? Your Zs are from really born 2000, really 1998, 2000, depending on which survey you go by, up until probably 2020 is when they're going to probably cut that off. So that's your Z. So right now, they're 20 years and younger. So if you're hiring 18 to 20-year-olds, you already have your Zs in the workforce. You've got your millennials from the 80s to the 2000. Your Xers are 66 to 80. Your baby boomers were born in 46 through 66. And again, those are flexible depending on by what survey you go by, but that's a rough estimate. But interestingly, look at these covers that have been out with different magazines over the years. And I actually want to read to you a great quote that I found. It says, "The world is passing through troublous times. The young people of today think of nothing but themselves. They have no reverence for parents or old age. They're impatient of all restraint. They talk as if they knew everything, and what passes for wisdom with us is foolishness with them. As for the girls, they are forward, immodest, unladylike in speech, behavior, and dress. Folks, that's from Peter the Hermit in 1274. So needless to say, these thoughts about the newer generations have been around for years and years, nothing new. And yet, we need to figure it out. And what's funny is we talk to companies every day across the country, and it's been about 10, 15 years, the millennials have been in the workforce, and they're now just figuring out. But interestingly, they're still complaining about it instead of figuring out what are their key characteristics and how do we tap into that to fill the skills gap. So we know back from 2013, the Boston Consulting Group actually did a report, and we have great information now. So the top condition for manufacturers' competitiveness is access to a talented workforce. That is key. And then, of course, we've got what the Department of Labor has indicated, that as of June 2017, how many jobs remained unfilled. And I actually think that's a very conservative number. We know it's larger and growing every day. The good news is we actually have that resource now. With the millennials and the Zs now entering, we have it. So what are some facts? Let's talk about this. Let's talk about these two generations. So how many make up of the millennials? 75.4 million. And then you have the Z generation, which is at 74 million and growing. And if you talk to folks right now, it's funny, they'll say, well, the silver tsunami, all the baby boomers, they're retiring. That's true. But talk to some of those Xers that were born from 66 on, and you know what they're going to tell you? They're already thinking about retirement. So guess what? Seriously, in 10 years, you could be looking at a population of only millennials and Zs because your Xers are already thinking about retirement. And that's very interesting. So let's talk about them because you know what? As we capture their strengths and their key characteristics, we're going to find that we can align their key characteristics and our learning and development strategies to attract them and retain them. So here's some facts. We've got the average person pretty much in the millennials and the Z generation both owning about 7.7 connected devices. Interestingly, they use 3 of them per day. Let's talk about their attention spans. You got millennials who are at 12 seconds and you've got Zs who are at 8 seconds. And another fact that's been out recently is that your Zs sometimes check their device 100 times per day. It's a habit. What's interesting is this actually has trickled down into other generations. Think about it. If you're an Xer or a baby boomer and how often you're checking your phone, it actually has become a habit. And I can say this with accuracy because I'm an Xer and I have the Amazon app on my phone. I'm a one-click, one-swipe type of gal. I want that. I personally like that. I don't like to wait. If pages don't load, I move on, and I'm an Xer. So as much as we'd like to point the finger, we need to look back at ourselves and say, how has technology shaped me? Am I also becoming impatient? Am I checking my phone? If I'm standing in line at the grocery store, what am I doing? Because it really does reflect our culture in general, not just these generations. So with that in mind, knowing behavior and appetite now for multitasking is so obvious. I talk to manufacturers that say they're not allowing any technology out on the floor. No, none of their phones are allowed. No technology out on the floor. Interestingly, I was at a brick manufacturer in North Carolina. They don't allow the phones out there, but they do have technology. They have iPads out there that are monitoring the processes and the equipment. And the different operators actually have their own avatar on this iPad. So it's interesting how a company has tapped into that, knowing that they want people checking devices, but to monitor the processes. So it's very interesting of how they've adapted to having an iPad with work-related info so folks can still go to technology with that behavior and that appetite. So another interesting fact, 15% of 25 to 35-year-old millennials are living in their parents' home. We know the Zs are definitely, for the most part, living also with their parents. But what's interesting is this is a 5% higher statistic than the Xers at the same age and 10% higher than the baby boomers. So it's very interesting. Now, let me give you another statistic. I wish we could interact at this point because this is a lot of fun. I would ask the crowd, why did the baby boomers buy a home? They bought a home to start a family. Xers, for the most part, they bought a home for an investment. This is the kicker. Why do millennials buy a home? And there was a study done on this. The number one reason for millennials to purchase a home is a yard or the dog. Amazing. I would have never thought of that. I hope you're chuckling because it sure made me laugh. But it's interesting. We need to think about that they're different. They definitely are. They have different buying characteristics, different priorities and values. And I'm going to come back to that of how we can tap into that word value. So another interesting fact, millennials value experiences over ownership. A recent study was done where 78% would rather spend their money on experiences like movies, camping, travel, rock climbing than on actual items. That's why you have, the tiny home explosion. That was a big one. But interestingly, these are leaning the other way. And when Better Homes and Gardens did a study recently, that generation talked about big homes. Guess what, though? Think about it. They're the HGTV generation. They grew up watching HGTV. So we're calling them Zs on this. I wanted just to make a mention that, you know what, they're also talked about as the iGen generation. Millennials on steroids, which I actually think is very false. I'm not a big fan of that one. They're the always-on generation, hyper-connected, thirst for instant gratification, and very research-heavy. So keep that in mind. So what's the challenge? Well, when we did our survey, interestingly enough, manufacturers agreed that millennials are important to their future, but less than half have a good understanding of this group. And this is actually an opportunity for you in your organization. Are you doing multi-generational training? So when I say that, I'm not just talking about your supervisory training and your lead training and management training where you're talking about multi-generations and managing a diverse workforce. But when you have new employees coming in that are millennials and Zs, are you training them on the other generations so that they can communicate effectively? Because I'm going to share a couple points next that really can impact that. And actually with this picture, I wish we would have had an 8-track because some of you know what an 8-track is. So let's talk about some of the myths that are out there because it's so important to have a good understanding for all generations. So some of the myths with the Zs and the millennials is that they have no work ethic. That's not true. They have a self-centered work ethic. These employees are dedicated to completing their tasks well, but have not been raised in a way that demands them to look around and see what should be done next. And let me expound on this. I call them the gaming generations. They grew up gaming. That's what they did. And what did they do with their games? They leveled up. They totally wanted to level up. So they weren't looking around for additional ammo on their level unless they needed it. What they were doing is they were looking to complete the task at hand and move on. And that's exactly what they do. I'm hearing from employers all the time about how they've got these generations coming in. They ask for their task list. They do it efficiently. And then they're like, I'm done. Can I go? And employers are like, no, are you kidding me? So it's interesting that older generations look at this as having no work ethic, where the younger generations actually look at this and say, hey, I've done it well, I'm ready to move on. So it's just different. And that's what I want to point out. It's different. Next one. They don't want to put in the hours to get ahead. Not true. They're willing to put in the time. However, they're uninterested in space time. Keep in mind, they have a different value system in this. Baby boomers, they were willing to invest time. Your millennials and Z see time not to be wasted. They see time as a commodity. Now, I want to challenge you on this because think about it. They had shifted the way workforce is looked at nowadays. You know what? When I came in as an Xer into the workforce, flexible time meant instead of 8 to 5, okay, you can start at 7:45, but you still stay till 8. Nowadays, you have people working remote. You do have a flex work time as well as flex schedules. So it's interesting how they have actually impacted us in a positive way, where we as Xers and baby boomers are also starting to value time in a good way. So think about that, chew on that, because it is important. It really is. So also with them, with time, I just want you to think about how you need to reward small successes and string them together for milestones. So they're looking at time a little bit different. The fact that they use the word value totally shifts things for us, because for Xers and baby boomers, when we started a job, value was seen on Friday when we got our paycheck. They want to be valued. It's a different word and it's used differently now. Next one, no respect for authority. Actually, they do have great respect for leaders and loyalty, but they don't respect authority just because. Loyalty and respect must be earned. The other thing that's amazing about these two generations is that they elevate friend to family status. Whoa, this blows my mind. I tell my children all the time, guys, don't do this. Don't do this. They're not going to be there for you like family. And yet they do. They elevate friends to family status. So you need to be thinking about that and how you can tap into that. And I'm going to touch on that again. But keep that in mind. Also, their number one reason they quit is they're not happy with their direct supervisor. It's like an 84% rate of why they quit. Not happy with direct supervisor. So I want to ask you, how's your leadership training? How are you grooming and mentoring? And I'm going to mention it again because it's that important. Next one, they don't want to grow up. I always laugh with this slide. They really don't know how to grow up. Come on, your Zs are just growing up. Millennials, they've been around a while. These younger generations, they're facing a delayed adulthood. Remember, they're staying in the home a lot longer. Many of them are moving back in with parents. Couple interesting things I just want to point out with them. Millennials, they do remember the recession, but not a lot of adversity. But they do remember the recession, and to them, nothing lasts forever, definitely higher divorce rates, so everything is unsure. Actually, what's interesting is back for the baby boomers, you would stay at a job for a while because you didn't want it to look bad on your resume. But nowadays, it's more common. They stay for a few years and they do move on. So we need to talk about how to keep them longer than a couple years. We want to keep them definitely longer for that. Something else to remember, your Zs have no memory of 9/11. And I pause with that because that actually is pretty relevant. Yes, we do have a delayed adulthood for many of them. So you know what, guys? They're not going to grow up without us helping them, mentoring them, guiding them along, giving them the information they need to succeed. So what are some other key traits? Connections and experiences. This is huge. Remember, they are a Google generation. They need an answer, they go to where it's found. That's why so many times they jump chain and they'll go right and knock on the CEO's door to get the answer if they think he has it and you don't, or she has it and you don't. So they really value connections and experiences. They also value with that wanting to know what the company's doing and how you're involved in the community and environmental initiatives, things like that. They really do value that, so keep that in mind, and I'll circle back when we talk about another point. Another one, workplace value. I've touched on this. That is important to them. It really is, and being visible, acknowledgement is huge to them. Visibility on how their work fits into the big picture. I am seeing more and more companies pick up on this, and they are communicating this to all of their employees of how they fit in to a bigger picture because they want to feel value. They want to go to work and see, why does that matter? So, work expectations, pretty interesting on this. Look at this. Millennials, 72%, they want career advancement. They want to learn new skills, 72%. They want their ideal job to allow them for this. So with that in mind, what's the best practices here? How can the companies build high performers and future leaders? You're going to be tapping into these Zs and millennials. How are you going to do it? But keep in mind that what I'm going to share next could be used for all generations that are starting in the workforce and are in there. And we're finding that's exactly what's happening. So, first point, strong onboarding. This is really interesting. So, when we started, I am going to say we, assuming that I've got Xers and Xers and baby boomers out there. When we started, we would go to a job, start up on Monday, and you know what? Say, you know what, we'll give it 6 months. We'll see how it goes. 6 months, maybe a year. For millennials and Zs, studies recently have indicated we're giving it 60 minutes. How's your onboarding is my question, because 60 minutes is a pretty short window of they're making up their mind right then how long they're staying with you. So, what are some of the things you need to be doing with a strong onboarding? Share your mission and vision. Remember, they want to feel valued. They want to fit into the big picture. Give them, on that first day when you're sharing your mission and vision, is to give them their gear, any of their hardware and software. Have it ready for them. Give them some swag. These love the swag piece, so they can begin to identify with your company. Another one is help them understand the community and environmental issues that you're involved with and the awards you have won, so that they can feel part of a community because they value and elevate friends to family status. The other thing is timing of when you have them start. Think about a pretext before the day they're going to start. Think of starting them possibly on a Tuesday or Wednesday at 10 a.m. so that the first thing they're coming into isn't Monday when you may be putting out all the fires and they sit out in the reception area. Went to a company back in April and went in, it was about 9:30, 10 a.m. to meet with HR. And interestingly enough, they had 3 people sitting out in the waiting room in work boots, T-shirts. I mean, you could tell they weren't there for a job interview. They were there to start work. And yet they were waiting. And they were sitting out there because someone was busy and couldn't start them off right away when they got there. So be thinking about that. You don't have to start 10 a.m., 8 a.m. 8 a.m. on a Monday, possibly start them at 10 a.m. either on a Tuesday or Wednesday. The other thing I want to encourage you to do is get feedback from your current employees that have started in the last year. Ask them about the onboarding, what they thought, how you could have improved on this. This is so important. Strong onboarding really is a key to success for both of these generations. You want them to immediately feel included, part of the team from day one, because they're forming their opinions from day one. And I know this to be a fact because we talk to employers every day where they're onboarding someone on Monday, and by Friday, they don't know if they're going to be back. And that's a big deal. You're investing your time and your money. We want them to stick around. So what are some of the other things that are key to this generation? Clear training plans and career pathways. And these need to be communicated on day one. These are so critical to the success of attracting them and retaining them, giving them documented expectations and plans, giving them short bursts of different learning methodologies, and technology is their comfort zone. Use that as a leverage, definitely leverage that and use that to your benefit. That is so important. As I'm talking to companies, I'm finding that not only for Zs and millennials, but also even Xers that are interviewing, they want to know how they can be developed and progress within the company. So it's really important. How are your career pathways? And this is where I've seen apprenticeship really take off very well in communicating what those expectations are. You're going to do A, B, and C, and then you're going to do D, E, and F. Because what they're asking is, how do I get your job in 6 months? And we laugh at that, but it's true. That's what they're wanting. They're wanting a clear, defined pathway. Now, Tooling U SME is strong advocates of a worker qualification model. We're doing these across the countries, whether they have an apprenticeship program or not. This is exactly what we're doing, which is actually an apprenticeship. If you think about it, it really is apprenticeship. So you have a candidate for qualification. You're going to give them knowledge and skills training with evaluation to see how they're doing as they're absorbing all this new information. You're going to do some on-the-job standard work training. And what's important to that is that on-the-job trainer credentialing. So important to have someone who can get what's in their mind, in their hands, out their mouth in a consistent, repeatable manner. It's huge. And then, of course, we have that final worker qualification standard, which, if you're doing apprenticeship, that is exactly it. So we are huge advocates of this. This really aligns with both Z's and millennials' needs. So important. So succession and mentoring programs. I've been saying it all along. They elevate friends to family status. They're looking for strong mentoring. And don't let the generations and the different generations be a barrier. If you're doing good training, you're educating everybody on what each generation values, this can then work in your favor. You need strong mentors. You need to develop the mentors and give them the training they need so that they can be successful as a mentor in this. Remember, 84% will leave their job because of their direct supervisor. Number one reason, you need to have strong trainers, build strong trainers, and definitely a strong learning culture. It is so relevant to this generation because you want to keep them for long term. And if you have, an apprenticeship that's a 4-year apprenticeship, wow, it gets them in the trenches, feeling valued with good trainers, good mentors, so that they can just be successful. Help them be successful. They're the gaming generation. They want to be successful at every level, and they want to move on. Flipped classroom. I love this slide. I put it in here. I know it looks a little corny, but I love it because so many of them are doing a flipped classroom where they're giving them short bursts of energy, short bursts of knowledge ahead of time, and then actually going out on the floor and putting it into practice. Everyone then is talking the same language, using the same terminology. It's catapulting that on-the-job training so that they are succeeding faster. So some of the best practices: provide strong onboarding for both of these generations, build clear training plans and career pathways, implement succession and mentoring programs, develop strong organizational trainers. Want to tell you a quick story here. So, I actually was in Ohio. I was in Ohio, Southern Ohio, visiting with some schools that were doing senior interviews. So these are the folks that are graduating this month, next month, and going out into the workforce, knocking on your door, giving you a resume. Heard it from two different ones in the same week. I go, and he's telling me about these crazy interviews. And I'm like, well, what was crazy about it? He goes, we're doing interviews with these kids. They're coming in, we're asking them questions. And when we got to this one question, they were quiet. It was a technical question, and they were quiet. So I asked the student, do you understand the question and do you have an answer? And they replied, I do, and I do understand, but I don't know if you'll understand my answer. Totally floored the interviewer. They were like floored. They were like, interview's over, we're done, and went to stand up. The student was appalled, like, what do you mean? And the faculty that was doing the interview says, if you do that in an interview will be over. You can't do that. You need to answer the questions. And I thought, wow, I was like floored. It was that same week, another high school told me a very similar story. And when they got back together as faculty and talked, they found that this was a theme, that they weren't getting the answers, and these students knew the answers, but the students didn't think who was interviewing them knew the answer. So I went home. So like I said, I've got 4 millennials. I have a Z. Actually, one of my millennials was kind of border. He could be a Z. And I was at the table with my Z. She's 17. And I said, Lizzie, I have a question for you. Now, I didn't want to lead her into the answer. So I flipped it around. And I said, I have a question. If you were out interviewing for a job and they asked you a question and you knew the answer, but you didn't think they would understand your answer, would you answer it? And she paused and she thought and she goes, No, Mom, I don't. I don't think I would probably answer it. I was flabbergasted. I about came out of my seat. So did my husband. He's like, what? We were floored. I looked at her and I said, don't do that. Please answer the question. Promise me you will answer the question, because they're expecting an answer, whether they understand it or not. And so I started pondering it for a while and thinking, why is it that these Z's aren't necessarily readily giving us the answer? And I've kind of been thinking about it, and I'm wondering, I don't know if this is the answer, but I want to challenge all of us who have looked to these younger generations to help us with our phones, with technology, because we can't figure it out. We're quick to go to them, and I raise my hand. This is me. I have a new app, and I can't figure it out. I have gone to her and said, hey, how do I figure this out? Because I'm trying to take a shortcut now. I don't have time. We're such a busy culture, so fast-paced, that now we just go right to the answer. I'm like, can you just help me with this? And I'm wondering if we have trained up generations to think that as Xers and baby boomers, we don't have the answers. Now, I do want to also point out this. 65% of your primary age students going into the workforce right now, 65% of them are going to be doing jobs that currently are not even developed yet. So they are going to be helping us to answer and figure out the problems that we have that we don't know we're going to have in the future, which is interesting. But I'm wondering if right now we have trained them to think that we don't have the answers, when we do know that we do have a lot of the answers. And bringing the generations together and putting our heads together with the past that knows what we've done, with the future for what we don't know what's yet to come, coming together to figure that out. So I just want to leave you with a few of that. So don't generalize. Communicate your corporate missions. Here's some final tips. Show them their future. Provide continually learning opportunities. Go digital. Remember, we're a one-click, one-swipe generations now, and culture. I'm an Xer, and I'm a one-click, one-swipe girl. I really want to go in there. I want to get it done and out. So how is your attracting when you're out there with your job post? Is it one click? Is it easy? Are you making it easy? Allow them to share their ideas. Get them involved in task force. This is huge. They love to be heard. And then provide regular and immediate feedback. So important. This is so, so important for the success of them. So remember I told you, the interview story, I gave you the research heavy, they thirst for instant gratification. Be thinking about all those different characteristics, the myths and the facts that I've shared with you, so that you can leverage that as you now start interviewing, hiring, and also attracting these generations. I'm seeing HR across the country actually even shift some of their policies. I was in Pennsylvania at a company that has about 100 employees, and interestingly enough, they have a lot of people that are related to each other and are friends. And I asked them, I said, how are you doing with retaining your population since you have so many millennials and Zs already working for you? It's like 75% of their population. And they said, we don't have a problem. And I said, what do you attribute that to? And they said, it's because we shift our policies so that we would hire friends and family. Now, I don't know about you, but when I started in the workforce, if I had a family or friend ask me if we were hiring, I was like, nope, sorry, we're not hiring. Even if I didn't want to work with them. I still don't necessarily want to work with them. But these newer generations do. And I'm seeing HR policies shifting across the country to reflect what will work for attracting these generations and retaining them. So I'd love to open it up with just about this topic regarding any questions or comments. And I'm going to look to Ann and Mike to see if anyone's put anything out in the chat boxes or would like to raise their hand so that we can open it up for a few minutes.
Great. Thanks, Denise. So we continue to invite you to enter any questions that you have in the chat box, which should be on the left-hand side of your screen. Again, if you're not seeing that chat box, there should be a little comment icon in the lower left-hand corner that will activate that, and then there's a box that you can enter your questions in there. So please feel free to fire off some questions. To get things warmed up, I do actually have a question. Have you seen any, or do you have any good examples of multi-generation training platforms that companies have utilized?
Wow. With multi-generational training, not so much a platform like giving an online class. Actually, I think with multi-generational training, I would encourage to do like a lunch and learn. Bring folks in, bring some pizza in, give it that kind of family feel, and then discuss it there. You could easily have a PowerPoint presentation. You really could pull a video off of YouTube and really keep it low-key, very welcoming. That is very important for both of those generations. That's what I've seen to be a huge success. Now, you don't have to necessarily go out there. I mean, there's a lot of great soft skills training. Don't get me wrong. There really is. But I think companies could really do something low pressure, low key, and get the conversation started on how these generations each bring value to the workplace.
Great, thanks. So we've had another question come in pertaining to encouraging family and friends to work together. Sometimes that can be a double-edged sword, and how does that dynamic get affected when an employee is terminated?
That's a great question. And actually, I was just talking with an employer down in the Dayton area a couple weeks ago, and they discussed how with them, and we've seen this with other companies, when it comes to those sticky situations, reviews, terminations, corrective action, what they've done, especially if that employee reports to a family member or friend, they've always made sure that there was another party involved in that communication, in that discussion or meeting that was not related, so that everyone was covered, there was no favoritism, and yet it still allowed for that natural dynamic where you do have a friend or family if they reported to them and if they were terminated. And they recently had a termination, and it wasn't an issue. They understood. They had that objective point of view with someone else in the meeting, and they understood it. So interestingly enough, that company in Pennsylvania that I was just at that has a high rate of that nepotism, they don't run into that issue because people are so close. They want to please. They want to do well. They're open to communication because this is family and friends. I'm guessing they're not hiring family that they don't get along with, folks. Just saying.
Let's hope so. So another question's come in. Think about work process with companies that have manual operations in their manufacturing process. They're finding it difficult to bring in new generations to fill positions that have a high kind of manual operation framework to them. Any advice?
Interestingly, manual. So when I told you I was at that brick manufacturing, talk about manual processes, they did have some that had the manual controls, but talk about manual labors. These young kids were pulling bricks right off the line as they were being made. So they were still monitoring the equipment. I think with manual, I think with that first onboarding is getting them involved with the hands-on, because you know what? No studies are indicating that these generations are that they're shying away from rolling up their sleeves and getting involved. No, there's been no studies. I haven't seen anything on that it actually is not a deterrent. I think the key is to get them engaged in the beginning, show them the benefit and how those processes that are manual tie into a bigger picture, that they're valued, that this is an important part of the processes of the company, of the success of the company, and how the products and services are benefiting us as a whole, as a community, as a world. environment. So I think, again, tying it back to what's important to them and how they're valued and how it fits into the big picture will help them see that. They don't have to have technology at their fingertips every day. They don't. But incorporating it where it's feasible and logical is good.
Great. We got an excellent question here that I think is probably a bit of a two-way street, and it's about accountability for younger employees and how to hold young employees accountable to performance standards when they may not be used to being held to a standard.
So true. So true. I think clear communication is key. Another one that I have seen because of the generation and the culture we're in, think about information and how it just is rapid fire at us. I think with expectations, they need to be clearly defined, continually in front of them, and in smaller chunks of information. And I've seen this with the younger generation, even in my own home and working with them, is that making them communicate it back to me is huge. And think about it. Think about in your leadership and your management training, some of those basic foundations for listening skills and communication skills need to be practiced, especially with these generations, having them repeat it back. You know what? Think about when we started in the workforce. We were just kind of given the expectations and we went with it, and we were expected to remember it. Nowadays, employers have contracts that they sign, they print out the work instructions, everything is clearly communicated. And I think it's now even more important with these younger generations. They may not have had that type of direction growing up at home. They may have had parents who both were working outside of the home and they were on their own. Make sure you're clearly communicating expectations and all those little milestones as well. I think that's very, very important and critical.
Great, thanks. One thing that struck me was this number one reason why employees quit, and it's that they don't like their supervisors. So it really reinforces the importance of that role within the organization. Shameless plug, we actually have a group of supervisors in our classroom space this morning going through a supervisory training series to really bulk up their understanding of the role of a supervisor and the wide breadth of knowledge and experience, not only just about process, but about people, that is important to effectively serving that role. So is there any other advice on how to cultivate that supervisory level within the organization to make sure that they don't become the reason why somebody leaves their organization?
You know what? That's excellent you're doing that training. Actually, the one thing I would encourage that we don't hear enough of is ongoing with those supervisors, those team leads, management, ongoing reminders to even them, because some of them are now millennials. We're seeing that. Ongoing every month, little pieces of information reminding them of the criticalness of having that multi-generational communication and value that's communicated very clearly to everyone. So I think not just a one-time supervisory training for these folks. I think you need to have continual reminders and keep it out there. Just keep coming back to it and refreshing them on the importance of communication, on the importance of listening effectively so that they are being part of the solution. And it's interesting, folks, you know what, I do say this a lot when I'm talking to companies, is when we started, if we were an Xer and a baby boomer, when you started working, you came in and you adjusted and adapted to that organization, to their culture, to what they were doing. Now, the Zs and millennials, they're not adjusting. And you know what? We could be rigid and say, well, I had to adjust, you need to adjust. Or we can say, you know what? We have a skills gap issue. We need to figure this out, and we need to figure it out fast. And you know what? If we need to adjust, we've been around the longest. we've got the experience. We are going to know how to best adjust to these younger generations, mentor them well, and continually support those frontline supervisors that are seeing them every day, communicating well with them, helping them feel as part of a family, and helping that whole statistic go down. So it's not 84% and these kids aren't leaving, because we need them to be around. They are our next workforce. I love this stuff. Sorry, guys, I get a little passionate.
That's quite all right. We love your passion. I had another question come in. Might relate to this, the importance of communication. Any suggestions for dealing with instances where allegations, assumptions about failure to meet performance standards or expectations is due to the supervisor not liking that individual versus documented facts of below expectation performance. So.
Yes. You know what? Nowadays, I see a lot of companies definitely making sure that things are now objective and not subjective. So important in those employee reviews. Even if they're not family and friends, having another pair of eyes. So if you think that is going on, I would suggest having it be a tag team of supervisors doing those type of reviews, doing those type of intervention conversations to cover and make sure that things are no longer subjective, but they're objective. Years ago, everyone went fishing on Saturday or whatever, did things on the weekends. And you know what, they would mark things off of, well, yep, Johnny did that, and they would give them the good old check mark, and it necessarily wasn't true. The flip side is also, if they're not liking them, they could be giving the check mark, well, his performance is below. If that is the case, I always encourage my organizations to have another set of eyes and ears with that to ensure it, document everything well, and clearly communicate those expectations and that documentation back to that employee, giving them that opportunity to step up. You know what? Think about it. They're gamers. When they don't do a level well, they go back and redo it. Give them that opportunity.
Great, thanks. Excellent questions. I'm sure there'll be others that will float in, and I believe we will have contact information available if participants would like to reach out with additional questions that may come up later. But let's stay on track and move on. Got a couple more slides to go through and wrap up as we promised by 12 o'clock. So as you've heard, taking to heart that these new generations really place a high value on clear training, education pathways, and training plans and career pathways. You've heard Denise touch on how apprenticeships can really be an effective tool to align those types of training platforms to the interests and needs of these younger generations. So we just wanted to make you aware that WireNet is trying to take the hassle out of the equation to allow more manufacturers to access these rich training platforms to develop your workforce using the apprenticeship model, where WireNet does a lot of the heavy lifting of assembling and organizing the program registration components, making sure that everything stays on track, and being your advocate and partner to ensure that there's effective training systems in place to develop your next generation of workers. We're also focused on talent pipeline development, so reaching into some of the career tech schools and high school programs to ensure that we're exposing these students at younger ages to apprenticeship pathways, manufacturing pathways, and giving them good work-based learning experiences, connecting up with companies that are in our apprenticeship consortium, where they can get those types of work-based experiences during their high school, junior, and senior years to really expose them to these pathways and get them on a track to consider going directly into an apprenticeship track, while they also are able to get some of that work-based learning credited towards their graduation requirements in high school. So there's really great effort underway right now to strengthen these pathways, give more avenues for students to get not only their academic credits accomplished in the classroom, but get some of that accomplished through work-based learning experiences that are exposing them to these manufacturing pathways. So if anybody is interested in learning more about our Northeast Ohio Manufacturing Apprenticeship Consortium, please reach out. We'd be happy to talk with you about the pathways that we have available. We currently have 2 specific pathways we're doing in machining and industrial maintenance, but we're always looking to talk to more companies where some of those additional pathways may be available as well. And speaking of that, there is a lot of infrastructure being built right now in Northeast Ohio to expand apprenticeship options for manufacturing businesses. There's several programs that are available through some of our partners in the community colleges, both in Cuyahoga and Lorain. So you can see a list here of some of the specific program options that are available for apprenticeships through some of these channels. And there's some great resources available to help offset some of the training costs that the state is distributed to these community colleges and through NOMAC to help offset up to $2,500 worth of year 1 training costs associated with companies that put new candidates into registered apprenticeship programs. So it's a great time right now to consider these pathways as a way to develop your workforce. And as Denise outlined, there's a lot of logical reasons that these types of structures will relate well to these younger generations, these gamers that are looking for levels and clear structure to how they can advance through their training and career pathways. So we strongly encourage you to consider apprenticeship options to address your workforce needs going into the future. With that, I want to thank our presenter today, Denise Ball, for sharing such great input, info, and advice. We really value her and Tooling U SME as partners of WireNet. We want to thank all of our participants for attending today's webinar. We hope you have a better understanding of the different generation motivators and development strategies. Both of our contact information is listed here on this last slide, and this presentation and the whole webinar will be available on a YouTube channel in the near future. So if you want to go back and revisit some of this rich content, you can do it that way. And feel free to reach out to us, either of us, if you have any additional questions. WireNet's got an ever-growing calendar of events, so keep checking our website for what's coming up. We've got a great plant tour at Advanced Controls coming up, and where you can learn about Industry 4.0, and we've got a safety roundtable series. Both of those will be kicking off in June. So check out wirenet.org to learn more about that and many of the other events that we have coming up. So thanks again for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your day.